You didn't fall in love with a narcissist because you were weak. You fell because you loved deeply, because you saw potential, because you believed in something that felt like connection. And maybe for a moment, it was. He mirrored everything you needed: the charm, the intensity, the attention that felt like oxygen. He made you feel seen in ways you didn't even know you craved. He asked the right questions, said all the right things, and made you believe you were safe. But it was never real. It was never deep. It was never love, not the kind you gave. Because he wasn't falling for you. He was studying you. He was learning your insecurities, your fears, your hopes, not to hold them, but to use them. Loving a narcissist doesn't start with pain. It starts with a dream, a fantasy, a high that feels like everything you ever wanted. And by the time the mask starts to slip, you're already invested. You're already explaining his behavior, already making excuses, already trying to love harder so he'll change. But he doesn't change. He just adapts. You start to notice things: the coldness, the control, the way he rewrites reality in conversations, the way you leave every argument feeling confused, even when you knew you were right. That's not love. That's manipulation. But you hold on. Because love, to you, means loyalty. Because love, to you, means trying. And because he gives just enough to keep you from leaving. Until one day, you realize you don't recognize yourself. You're quieter, more anxious, less joyful. You walk on eggshells. You replay every word before you speak. You say sorry for things you didn't even do. That's the truth about loving a narcissist. It chips away at you, slowly, quietly, until all that's left is a version of you that lives for his validation. And still, he tells you you're the problem, that you're too sensitive, too dramatic, too emotional, too needy, so you shrink, you silence your needs, you try to be easier, more understanding, more chill. But no matter how much you give, it's never enough. Because the goalposts always move. Because the more you love, the more he takes. He needs your empathy, not to heal, but to feed. He needs your forgiveness, not to grow, but to reset the cycle. He needs your softness, not to protect it, but to dominate it. And still, you stay. Not because you don't see the damage, but because you remember who he was in the beginning. You remember the charm, the laughter, the promise. And you keep hoping that version will return, but that version was never real. It was bait. It was a mask. It was the way in. That's what hurts the most. The realization that you loved someone who never truly existed. You loved his potential. You loved the pieces he showed you. You loved the version he pretended to be. And that's not your fault. That's not your shame. That's the cost of loving someone who never learned how to love. Of giving your heart to someone who only knew how to use it. But here's the part they don't tell you. You still loved right. You still gave from a place of truth. You still showed up with honesty and depth. And that is not something to regret. That is something to be proud of. Because love is not the mistake. Believing he could love the same way back, that's the lesson. You thought you were building something real. You thought if you just held on long enough, it would all make sense. You thought the love you gave would eventually soften him, but it didn't, because you were speaking a language he never planned to learn. You gave him grace. He took it as weakness. You gave him loyalty. He used it as leverage. You gave him patience. He used it to stretch his lies. And every time you questioned the shift, he flipped the blame. He made you feel crazy, made you feel needy, made you feel like the problem was your expectations, not his actions. That's how a narcissist loves, with control, with confusion, with performance. He loved the way you made him feel, not the way you saw him. He loved the admiration, the spotlight, the supply. But the real you, the one with needs, boundaries, and questions, he couldn't handle that. Because a narcissist doesn't want a partner. He wants a mirror. He wants someone who reflects only what he wants to see. The moment you break that illusion, the moment you show your truth, you become the enemy. He'll start to distance himself. He'll punish your questions with silence. He'll reward your obedience with crumbs. And you'll chase, not because you don't know better, but because he's trained you to. Trained you to believe love must be earned. Trained you to believe that if you were just more, he'd be better. But love doesn't require performance. Love doesn't keep score. Love doesn't punish. And still, you stayed. Because deep down, you hoped. Because deep down, you believed that maybe this time, he'd mean it. That maybe this time, he'd see what he has in you. That maybe this time, it would be enough. But it never is. Because narcissists don't want love. They want control. And you can't give enough to someone who's addicted to power. You can't be soft enough for someone who sees empathy as weakness. You can't stay gentle with someone who sharpens your love into a weapon. So you start losing yourself, piece by piece. You forget how it felt to laugh without tension, to sleep without worry, to speak without overthinking, to feel free in your own body, your own voice. And that's what loving a narcissist really does. It doesn't just break your heart. It erodes your identity. It disconnects you from yourself until you're not sure what's real anymore. But deep down, your soul knows. That's why the anxiety creeps in. That's why your chest gets tight before every conversation. That's why your gut screams when your heart stays quiet. Because you know. You've always known. This isn't love. This is survival. This is trauma. This is emotional warfare dressed up as romance. And the moment you name it, it all starts to change. Not instantly, not easily, but truth has a way of breaking illusions. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You start to ask different questions. Not, how do I get him to care? But why am I still trying to convince someone of my worth? Not, what can I do to fix this? But what would happen if I chose myself for once? That's when the healing begins. That's when you slowly start returning to yourself. It won't be perfect. You'll miss him, or rather, the version he pretended to be. You'll grieve the future you imagined. You'll replay moments and wonder if it was ever real. But each day, you'll get clearer. Each day, you'll breathe a little deeper. Each day, your mind will fight back. Your voice will rise again, and eventually, you'll stop loving him in pieces because you'll remember how to love yourself as a whole. One day, you'll look back and realize it wasn't love. It was survival. You were loving someone who only loved power. You were trying to nurture someone who only knew how to extract. You weren't in a relationship. You were in a performance. And every day you stayed, you were shrinking, dimming, silencing parts of yourself to keep the peace, to avoid conflict, to prevent another emotional punishment. But the truth is, you were never hard to love. You were just easy to use because you're kind, because you care, because you give. He saw that. He knew it from the start, and that's why he chose you. Not because he was drawn to your light and admiration, but because he wanted to control it. Loving a narcissist is a cycle. Idealize, devalue, discard. And every time he starts the cycle again, you lose another part of your soul. But now, you're waking up. Now you're starting to see it for what it was. Not love, manipulation, not passion, power games, not bonding, trauma. You thought you were fighting for love, but what you were really fighting for was the fantasy he sold you at the beginning. You were trying to make sense of something that was never built on truth. And the deeper you fell, the more you blamed yourself for why it wasn't working. You believed if you could just do more, say less, be better, stay quieter, he'd finally see you. But he never saw you. He only saw what he could take. He only saw how long you'd stay silent, how long you'd tolerate the emotional chaos, how much pain you could absorb without walking away. But now you've had enough. And that moment where you stop trying to prove your worth, that's your freedom. That's your turning point. That's when you begin again, not with him, but with you. You stop over-explaining. You stop justifying your needs. You stop defending your pain. You stop calling dysfunction love. You begin setting boundaries without guilt. You start choosing silence over arguments. You realize that peace isn't boring, it's sacred. That being loved shouldn't feel like punishment. That real love doesn't leave you in survival mode. And here's what's beautiful. When you leave a narcissist, you don't just get your time back. You get your identity back. You get your joy back. You get to start remembering what real love feels like. Love that doesn't demand you shrink. Love that doesn't weaponize your heart. Love that doesn't hurt you and then call it growth. You get to start trusting yourself again. Because the hardest part about loving a narcissist isn't just the pain they cause, it's the way they make you doubt yourself, your memory, your instincts, your truth. But now, every step forward becomes a victory. Every no you say becomes a boundary. Every moment of clarity becomes a return to your power. And slowly, you learn this. You were never too much. You were just too awake, too empathetic, too real for someone who built his life on illusion. Loving a narcissist hurt you, but it didn't destroy you. And that matters more than anything else. Because you're still here, still standing, still rising. You don't walk away from a narcissist because you stopped loving. You walk away because you finally started loving yourself more. You don't leave because you gave up. You leave because you're done giving everything and receiving nothing. You stop reaching, stop chasing, stop hoping he'll become someone he never intended to be. That moment when you stop trying to fix it, that's when the healing begins. Because you realize it's not your job to repair what someone keeps breaking. It's not your job to prove you're worthy to someone who never planned to value you. You were never too much. You were just too awake, too intuitive, too aware. You noticed the shifts. You noticed the control. You noticed the way he twisted everything to protect himself and blame you. And for so long, you questioned your own perception. You asked yourself if maybe you were the one making things difficult, if maybe you just needed to try harder, if maybe this was love, and you just didn't know how to handle it. But love doesn't look like anxiety. Love doesn't look like isolation. Love doesn't make you beg for clarity. You wanted honesty. You got manipulation. You wanted effort. You got excuses. You wanted connection. You got control. And still, you gave more. Because that's what you do. You feel everything deeply. You give people chances. You hope. You care. And that's not a flaw. That's a strength. But only when it's given to someone who respects it. Only when it's given to someone who sees your heart as something sacred, not something to step on. The truth about loving a narcissist is this: they don't destroy you all at once. They chip away, they make you question, they make you doubt. And then they pretend to rescue you from the pain they caused, but you're not falling for that anymore. You're not mistaking gaslighting for intensity. You're not calling disrespect just his way. You're done rewriting your boundaries to keep a relationship intact that was built on lies. And that shift is everything. Because now, you're no longer afraid of losing him. Now you're afraid of losing yourself again. And that fear, that power, that's what guides you back home to you. You start remembering what you deserve, not the fantasy, not the potential, the reality. Real love, real effort, real safety. Because you've learned something now. Being loved shouldn't feel like being erased, and you'll never let that happen again. Healing after a narcissist isn't easy. It's not just about forgetting them. It's about unlearning every lie they made you believe about yourself. It's about untangling your worth from their approval. It's about realizing that their inability to love had nothing to do with your ability to be loved. You are not too much. You are not too emotional. You are not too needy. You were just in the wrong story. You were cast as the caretaker in a relationship that needed a mirror, not a heart. You were trying to save someone who didn't want to be saved. He wanted to be worshipped. And now you see it. Now you feel the truth. The tightness in your chest. That wasn't love. The fear of upsetting him. That wasn't intimacy. The anxiety you lived with. That wasn't connection. It was control. It was manipulation. It was emotional theft. But here's what matters most. You made it out. Maybe not all at once. Maybe not gracefully. But you made it. And now, everything gets to be different. Now, you get to rebuild. Not rushed, not desperate, not with someone else, but with yourself. You start remembering the version of you before the gaslighting, before the guilt, before the self-doubt. You were powerful before he met you. But now you're something more. You're clear. You're grounded. You're stronger. Because once you've survived a narcissist, you don't just recover, you rise. You rise with sharper eyes, stronger boundaries, wiser choices, and most of all, peace that doesn't ask permission. You don't have to prove anything anymore. Not to him, not to anyone. You gave love. You gave truth. You gave everything. And now you give that love to yourself. That is the truth about loving a narcissist. It hurts, it breaks, it blinds, but it also teaches. It also awakens. It also rebuilds. You learn that your love is not the problem. It never was. Your love is the gift, and one day, the right person will see it. But until then, you hold it close. You protect it. You don't hand it over to anyone who hasn't proven they can hold it with care. Because you're done giving yourself to people who can't even face themselves. You're done bleeding for people who hand you knives. You're done confusing chaos for chemistry. And you're done calling pain passion. Now you choose calm, you choose clarity, you choose yourself. And that is where your real story begins. You didn't lose when you left him. You won the moment you chose yourself. You stopped dancing for crumbs. You stopped confusing manipulation for meaning. And you started healing. Subscribe if you're choosing peace over pain. Comment, I remember who I am, if this spoke to you. Turn on notifications so you never miss a moment of truth. This isn't your ending, it's your return. And this is the motivational call.